the diameter of the planet is potentially your market. You've got to think big.
In an A+ market, even a mediocre team with mediocre technology could win, but even an A+ team with A+ technology in the wrong market is probably going to fail.
What were some roadblocks and how did you decide that this is the right home for your first business?
I wish I could say there was an extreme method to this madness. Like in the early days of Turing, we had acquisition offers from Google and Twitter, but we chose not to take them.
What is one thing that AI is still struggling to do that you think humans are far better at?
We are very much in this paradoxical situation where it's difficult for AI to even automate 15 minutes of the median worker's job.
Welcome to another episode of TIE Talks. Today, it's a big privilege for me to host Vijay Krishnan, who's come all the way from Palo Alto. Vijay, who's not just had one success, he's had a successful exit, but he's gone on to build another very exciting startup venture called Turing.com, which is a unicorn. We thought we'll do this pod to sort of just do a deeper dive into his journey, his life, and his perspective on the startup ecosystem, on AI. And let's get started. Vijay, thank you for joining us in Singapore, and thank you so much for doing this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Prantik. It's a pleasure to be here.
Maybe let's sort of roll back the years. Obviously, you grew up in India like many of us. Maybe give us a sense of what were your growing up years like. And today, when you look back, are there any sparks that you can think of or dots that you can sort of connect to say, you know what, there was a entrepreneur in Vijay somewhere whilst growing up?
So in my case, really, there was none of that. I graduated from IIT Bombay in 2005, and there weren't really very many unicorns from India at that time. And there was not much of an ecosystem either. So at that time, this was, I think, too theoretical an idea in my mind. Maybe the only thing, if at all you want to call it, that could be traced back to a trait I've always had, is being significantly non-conformist, willing to hold opinions significantly contrary to the mainstream, etc. In that sense, I probably had that trait. Maybe that is one of the many useful traits, but far from, I think, what would have been predictive, I think.
That's a very interesting thing that you say. And I think I've heard that as well, that, being a non-conformist, questioning things. Now, if you sort of again go back to maybe your schooling days or, your childhood, where did that come from? Any family influence, anyone that you idolized, or it was just a naturally ingrained trait in you?
It was just an innate trait, I think. Like for me, I find it equally hard to simulate, for example, social conformity, right? Like, humans are, I think, driven by a lot of things. I'm sure a little bit driven by a quest for seeking what is reality and understanding reality, but you're also very much driven by some measure of social acceptance and various things of that sort. Both these make evolutionary sense, but I can imagine it manifests in different individuals in different ways. I think I have always enjoyed gaining some key insights which might be contrarian, but which are probably true.
And growing up, again, going, in your childhood or your college days, where did you seek inspiration from? Any few individuals, any institutions? What inspired you in life?
So there were a lot of things. Like never in my life have I found one single source of truth or one single source of anything. It's been quite distributed. I think I've generally tried to be open to all sorts of things, contrarian opinions, books, videos, materials, whatever. Rarely have I seen one single source solving everything or helping achieve enlightenment or anything like that. But largely it's been distributed. Like, for example, even some of the books or authors that have very interesting things to say often saturate after one or two books in terms of the novelty of their ideas. So I think best to sort of cast your net as wide as possible, I think.
And I suppose if you are well-read and you're diversified in your sort of seeking of knowledge, you're automatically exposing yourself to a broader spectrum. Hence, that builds up that diversity of thought and perhaps the non-conforming element.
Yeah. In my case, honestly, I think it's much more nature than nurture. No question. Yeah, I don't think I was trained to think this way or anything.
Talking about IIT, of course, the IITs are world famous for, doing so many great things today. When you joined the IIT, maybe give us that, what was the IIT life like? Obviously there's a lot of glamour from outside, the good and the bad. And, how did that shape you, the person, you, the entrepreneur?
Yeah, obviously, I tremendously enjoyed being there. It was great to be surrounded by a lot of smart people, a challenging curriculum, some great professors, including my research advisor, Shauman Chakrabarti, who got me started with AI back in 2003. So I've been at this for about 22 years now.
AI in 2003. I want to unpack that. Give us your sense now, having been a successful entrepreneur in AI. When did AI really start, in its development? And what was AI in 2003 when you encountered it?
I suppose all the way to Alan Turing and the Turing test and all that. You had certain developments in neural networks even in the 60s and everything, even in the 90s. Like, for example, the support vector machines and other things were created in the 90s, which were a popular classification algorithm then. And there was that certain old school class of supervised learning methods that I think people tried to make the most of until that deep learning era in 2012. So I would say earlier the applications were narrower, but still a lot of systems that literally finance the entire internet, right? Like ad ranking systems were very much powered by AI even in the 2000s. But it was just the older school versions of AI, certainly less powerful than what they are today.
So, you spoke about your research advisor. What was your thesis around, when you were studying at IIT, and what work did you do that sort of got you interested and entrenched into AI?
I largely worked on problems to do with AI or machine learning, as it was more popularly called, then applied to problems in text, web search, entity extraction, classification, regression, various problems of that sort. My thesis was on a subcomponent of question answering systems. So, now, of course, ChatGPT in many ways is a question answering system, but there were preliminary attempts made in that direction even then, where the idea was that rather than standard keyword search, we want to allow users to ask whole questions. We want to have different ways and means to break down the intent of what the question is looking for, identify candidate answers in the entire web or in some kind of corpus, and rank them. So that is what my work was on at that time.
And the day when you graduated, I'm sure it would have been a huge milestone for you and your family. At that point in time, what was in your head? What was Vijay's dream and ambition when the day you left IIT Mumbai?
My plan was at that time to very much go to grad school, get my PhD, and then figure out what to do next.
So even then, at that point in time, on graduation day, there was no entrepreneurship on the scene.
Yeah, I thought, okay, let me get my PhD. Maybe something like this looks interesting in the future, but I had no idea how it would look, etc. Certainly did not plan this thing. After a master's degree at Stanford, I would be out of there starting my first company.
Fair enough. And we'll come to that. IIT versus Stanford, two exceptional universities. Just give me a sense of the similarities and differences of two of the best institutions from the respective countries in India and USA.
The similarities are certainly that very smart people among the students, among the professors, etc. Stanford, of course, in many ways is, it's the world's best when it comes to its, research programs and everything. Yes, that is what I would broadly call the similarities. Both were quite solid in their tech programs or engineering or STEM programs. The differences were certainly that, I guess, when it comes to, let's say, the PhD programs and the extent of the research, etc. Of course, the IITs were certainly behind the top few universities. They were, they were certainly in many important ways sort of closing the gap. Like, for example, the kinds of research that was definitely a step function higher than what would happen at the IITs in the past, and now too the AI firepower at the IITs has definitely beefed up a lot more. But yeah, the reality is Stanford in many ways, right? Given the funding, the ecosystem, being in the heart of the Silicon Valley and everything, was a different place even when it came to research. And of course, when it came to entrepreneurship, Stanford is quite matchless, even when it comes to any other US universities in the world. like Berkeley is just a 45-minute or a 1 hour drive away. There's a big difference between these two universities, even in terms of the kinds of ecosystem, what individuals are focusing on, and those things become self-reinforcing. Like a world in which everyone, professors have a lot of exposure to startups. They are advising a few different ones. Maybe they have done one or two in the past. Every 10th student is actually doing a startup. Every third student is thinking of a startup. It's a very different thing. And of course, venture capitalists too have had so many successes, backing likes of Google, Yahoo, so many of these kind of companies, and that pattern, of course, continued even in later years. That naturally VCs too are matching patterns. They are trying to figure where the next unicorns, where the next large public companies are going to be started from, and consequently they too were a lot more open to meeting, and these things in many ways became, I would say, self-fulfilling.
Fascinating. And that is my next question. Exactly, we've all grown up reading about this environment and ecosystem of Stanford and the success stories. Would you say that the seeds of entrepreneurship in that sense were sort of germinated inside you and your co-founder at Stanford because you were part of it, you were seeing others, emerging as grad students turn entrepreneur? What was that pivotal point in your life which made you believe that, man, I should do this, I should take this path? Because like you said, post IIT, it was about a PhD and perhaps into research. Yeah. What led to that change in heart?
I would say about a year in, after a lot of exposure to this, I more or less at least became a lot more open to the idea of starting up a lot more quickly. And it also felt really within reach, right? Earlier, it seemed like too theoretical an idea without knowing anything about it, what it takes, how do you raise funding, the whole thing, basically. While it certainly started looking a lot more within reach. So I would say about 1 year in, I warmed up a lot more to the idea. My current co-founder, Jonathan, and I were brainstorming various ideas, and we eventually went on to start our first company together. Turing is, of course, the second company the two of us again did together after exiting our first company.
Great point on, about Jonathan, for example, right? Did you, in your case, in your journey, was it finding Jonathan, the co-founder, first and then the idea? Or it was the idea that sort of brought you guys together? Which happened first?
No, it was Jonathan, the co-founder, first. I mean, he was a good friend. We had collaborated on quite a few things around this one, AI and machine learning and search, various projects. We did one class together where we got an A+ on web search, and we also became housemates in our second year at Stanford. So there was a lot more time to brainstorm and so on. That is very much how it started.
I think in many Indian families or South Asian families, it is not just perhaps an individual decision. You probably consult friends, family. In my case, it took a while before I sort of, got everyone's consensus, if at all. How was that journey? Like, what did your parents say that, our son's gone there, done grad school, Stanford? Were they excited? Were they happy? Were they skeptical in the journey of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think there's hardly any startup entrepreneurs in my extended family. There's a lot of people with PhDs who are faculty members and at various good universities around the world and everything. Hardly any folks in this thing who are in the startup world. I think my immediate family was surprisingly quite supportive. Though I'm sure some family members were certainly wondering why I'm not doing the usual stable job thing at that point.
Yeah. All right, let's get to your first company. I'm presuming you all brainstormed and you all spent time together, ideas came. Just give us a sense of when did you all decide on, okay, let's do it. Here's the idea. What were the first 60, 90 days like when you were sort of conceptualizing and starting the first company? Which year was it?
Well, we got funded and founded that company in, I want to say 2008. Yeah, that was the time. Well, at that time, our idea was that we wanted to build a personalized search engine that could search your web history. Now, of course, modern browsers make this a lot better, easier, etc. But at that time, those didn't really have that kind of functionality. It would be very valuable to enable people to save everything they have seen in the past and be able to access them more easily. And at that time, given the state of the search and everything, I think the market gap in that direction was also larger. I mean, at that time, honestly, we were first-time entrepreneurs. We developed in the later years, and investors took a bet on us, likely pattern matching the same Stanford pattern and the Stanford computer science AI type of a pattern. And then we got funded and we just went at it.
2008, probably GFC is somewhere around the corner. How difficult, because a lot of founders get very daunted, especially tech-oriented founders who may not have had the exposure or experience on fundraising. Tell us a bit more about that experience. How many did you all approach? How many no's? How difficult? How did you learn the tricks? Or was it easy because you came from Stanford?
At that point, it was certainly not as easy, but the Stanford network was still quite valuable in terms of people we could consult for advice, for investor intros and various things. I'd say we iterated on it, got our act together, and yes, it was certainly not easy. We had to take a lot of meetings, understand the tricks of the trade. Fortunately, at that time, the financial crisis had not yet happened. I think it probably happened a few months after we closed our round.
Got it. And the second thing, one is funding. The second thing around, who was your first paying customer? And what did that feel like? How did you go about acquiring that first customer? Of course, eventually you all were running your ARRs into multi-millions, but what was that experience and that journey to get that first big paid customer like?
Our first company, at least, was not in the B2B business. It was very much B2C. And so I don't think we quite had this type of experience, right? The one you get with B2B, where you're closing a large contract manually, and then you have a much more intuitive feel of what product market fit looks like. B2C was not quite like that. I think we got distribution by way of the various Firefox had an add-on store, Internet Explorer had another add-on store, and we figured out some other ways and means, some social/viral mechanisms for distribution as well.
Wow, just listening to Firefox and Internet Explorer, that tells us, not just in terms
Chrome
of,
had not even launched.
Correct, right? To think that we were operating in a non-Chrome world back then, but phenomenal. And we'll fast forward there. You obviously ran the company for a few years. Eventually, there was an exit. Did you always plan that exit, or was it serendipitous? How did you have lawyers, bankers guiding you? Just tell us through the process of growth to exit. How did that happen? What were some roadblocks, and how did you decide that this is the right home for your first business?
Right. Again, I wish I could say there was an extreme method to this madness. Like in the early days of Turing, when we were a lot smaller, even we had acquisition offers from Google and Twitter, but we chose not to take them. We chose to raise more money and continue growing. So I think we kind of came to the realization that the B2C arena of at least in the kind of space we were in, was a lot more challenging, because while we thought of our particular business as content recommendations, that is what we focused on for at least the second half of the company's journey. In reality, we were really competing for attention and for people looking to get entertained. And this was a much more brutally competitive market than, than we had gone in there thinking. Earlier, we thought, okay, we are maybe competing with some other news apps. We are maybe competing with a Flipboard or someone else. But in reality, I think we were competing with Facebook, with Twitter, with YouTube, with Netflix, with everyone under the sun. And ultimately, we figured that B2C is not quite the right thing, but our same personalization technology could be a lot more valuable to these content recommendation ad networks. And ultimately, those were the kinds of collaborations we engaged on, which ultimately led to an acquisition.
Before we sort of jump to Turing, when you look back at that first startup journey, are there like any one or two moments or one or two things that you feel, not mistakes, but regrets or things that you should have done differently or had a different perspective? What would you change, if at all you could rewind?
I think sometime when running our first startup, we heard Andreessen say something to the effect that when you think of team, technology, and market as factors that can eventually drive startup success, market was the most important of all. And in an A+ market, even a mediocre team with mediocre technology could win. But the reverse almost always is not true. Even an A+ team with A+ technology in the wrong market is probably going to fail. Very early in our founder journey, I don't think we fully internalized the wisdom of that. But very soon, it became quite apparent to us, the truth in that specific thing. I mean, a startup journey, if you want to make something of it, you're probably looking at many years. When we were pretty much right out of a school at Stanford, I don't think we quite understood this thing. Like, for example, there's this popular thing called the secretary problem, where again, the idea is something like use the first 1/3 of the thing of your budget for exploration, the remaining 2/3 for actually tapping into the opportunity itself. And people certainly don't do this, right? You may spend 2 months tinkering with an idea, but then you're spending 10 years on it. It's very, very misallocated. Like, you may be climbing the wrong hill entirely. There might have existed another opportunity that was adjacent where the market characteristics were a lot better. So I would say it's the market above all. And when I say market specifically, what I mean is a number of things, including the total addressable market. What is the current status quo there? Do you have an opportunity to build something that is 10x better? Do you have some key insights in this industry that make it possible for you to build something 10x better while many hundreds or thousands of entrepreneurs have not been able to do so? Is there any why now type of characteristic to this specific market or problem? Like, whatever it is you're doing now, is it the case that it would not have been possible to do this 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Yeah, so I would say this is probably a key thing that I don't think we had enough of a sense of in our first company. Like, we executed a lot of things right, but not nailing this properly can mean leaving a lot of value on the table.
That's a brilliant insight, A+ market, because I think especially for a lot of our founders in Southeast Asia, this is a challenge because, especially when you're starting out of college, you're probably also biased that, look, I've only grown up in Singapore, Southeast Asia. This is the only world I know. You start only serving the market here. And many times without that exposure, like you said, or that maturity, you just don't think that, hey, there could be a larger market. And as you rightly said, it's not just the TAM, but why now? Why not, the timing part of it? Also, what is that key insight that probably underpins your business idea that no one else could have done it?
Yeah. In fact, it's very interesting what you should say about this, right? Like, people in Singapore or Southeast Asia know that market. I feel like it was the same for us out of school. We had written a lot of papers on web search and machine learning. We were like, okay, I know this problem. Do I know anything about the healthcare industry, etc.? No. Do I know anything about a lot of industries? No. So it was much the same thing. Like, I do think it would have been probably better for us to maybe understand the state of different industries and various opportunities, etc.
Fantastic. Let's transition to your second phase of life. What was the one or two things Jonathan and you did to celebrate? Because sure, Turing came eventually, unicorn, we'll come to that. But even an exit at an early stage of your life is pretty defining. How did you all celebrate individually or as co-founders? We'll start with that, and then we'll talk about how did the idea of Turing dawn? So how did you celebrate?
We spent a little bit of time with the company that acquired us, but after that we took a nice break, rested, recharged, traveled.
All in the US, or did you guys go somewhere else as well?
Mostly in and around the US, maybe some Mexico and so on.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember my wife and I think traveled a lot more in those few months than what we maybe did for the next 5 years straight.
I can imagine she must be overjoyed. You have more time for her.
Yeah. After having started Turing. So that, and I think that was a time for wild exploration. Really, like we were having all sorts of conversations. Okay, let's understand more about healthcare. Let's understand more about B sales and what tools these folks are using. Let's understand more about recruiting. In fact, I even remember there was this some recruiter at this agency that contacted me regarding some position. I said, I'm not interested, but can I come and watch you guys at work, basically. And that guy said, well, I don't have to talk with the owner of my firm. That guy was a little bit of a tech enthusiast. He's like, oh, he's a startup founder. Come, in fact, so I hung out at his firm, spent some 3 or 4 days in his office. He was sharing with me all kind of pain points regarding his workflows, why he thinks various software tools are broken, what features he wants in those tools, etc. Then even speaking with the recruiters, how much time do they spend prospecting candidates? How much time do they spend with clients? What is the pricing model? The whole economics of the business. I understood a tremendous amount in those 2 to 3 days. So the point is, I went on many little quests like this at that time, which was very valuable, because the thing is, once you're logged into a specific idea, the world really wants fastest possible growth rates from you and nothing else. There's really not much time to catch a breath. Like pivoting, etc., ends up often destroying a lot of value in the process. So it's really valuable if you can kind of do all the wild exploration you can in the beginning, and then pin down something that is likely to be really big.
Fascinating. Celebrations, wild explorations, then spending time at the recruitment firm. Is that where the idea of the genesis of Turing.com was, you would say?
I think there was part of it, right? It helped me tie some threads together. But there was also another dot that we ended up kind of connecting, which was that in our prior startup, we operated a bit unconventionally in that we had a Silicon Valley team, just like any other Silicon Valley startup. But we also ended up working with a bunch of really talented engineers from who were all remote distributed from Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Serbia, China, the Middle East, India, and so on. And we actually managed to make that remote team work quite well together. It was all, of course, done by brute force.
Sure.
But what we realized was that casting this kind of planetary net meant that we could really put together an all-star team in a manner which would have been very difficult if we had opened a physical office someplace where you're much more constrained to talent in that specific city or that specific geography. I think that insight, maybe coupled with the increasing amount of insights we got about the recruiting industry, the tech services industry, helped us sort of bring everything together into a coherent thesis and some coherent, at least, point of view that we had, which was contrarian, which we believed to be correct.
Fantastic. So clearly the contrarian in you once again sort of came into the picture. And would you say in hindsight that this time around, both Jonathan, you and the team were far more deliberate about the A+ market? You said the global team. Was that more deliberate?
Absolutely. Yes. So this time, in fact, we spent a few months, I would say, gainfully unemployed, doing nothing more than travel and exploration, because we figured there's no rush. Yeah. So that was pretty much what we did at that point. Then we were EIRs at Foundation Capital. Again, different firms run EIR programs very differently. The way Foundation Capital ran it was, there were really no EIR responsibility, so to speak. It was much more like, hey, why don't you come hang around our offices? If you want some weekly feedback on your thinking, etc. We are happy to do that. You want intros to various industry leaders or whatever you want intros to, we'll make that. And of course, consider us when it comes to your initial investment.
This EIR, what's the thinking behind this? Because again, to me, because we don't see much of that in Singapore and India, where to us it seems very egalitarian that, look, no holds barred, no strings attached, come spend some time, read research, meet people. Is that really the way it operates, that they just back, or there's a conviction on good people and good founders and they just sort of let them bloom? And it's more like you said, hey, do consider us. So assuming you spend time there, but you didn't consider them, that's fine. There's no string attached.
Yes, that is correct. I don't know exactly what the thing is. South Park Commons is probably slightly different. They are still an accelerator and everything. But a lot of people absolutely do this no strings attached thing. Well, the thinking is simply the following, right? That on one hand, right, it's not easy to get a lot of things right with your startup and raise funding and so on, often, especially when you're a first-time founder. So it can be very tempting to think that all a VC has to do is, sit back on their couch and good deals will just come to them. That's not really it. They may get hundreds of deals, but money is really made on the very best deals, on the very best founders that they can get their hands on. So definitely cultivating founders, getting to know them early, all that stuff is very valuable, because at the end of the day, right, like a lot of the good founders are likely to have multiple options. So one very good way to build a trust, or mutual trust rather, is exactly this form of low stakes engagement. Founders with options will want to inherently work with VCs who are more helpful, who are pleasant to deal with, and people they find trustworthy, and so on. And this can be a very good sort of way to make that happen. And like this also, for example, gives them a very nice head start, right? Like, yes, there is no strings attached, but as a practical matter, what will end up happening is people will end up taking their money and not someone else's money, because there's a lot more of this mutual thing. Like a new firm who's meeting you for the very first time, you too would not know, well, how would these guys be to work with? I get them on their board, and then will it be a pain, etc. And they too do not quite know you to the same deep extent. They may know about the idea, etc. But so I think ultimately this ends up being a very nice sort of deal flow mechanism. For
Beautiful,
sure.
because low stakes, I love that word. You build relationship, you spend time, and you get to know. Things could, of course, always go wrong, but so to speak, a known devil, and you have a comfort built.
Right. But again, right, like you use the term egalitarian. I would not really call it that, because there is a very, very careful hand selection of who you want in the program. Like Aditya Agarwal, I'm sure, doesn't take away every Tom, Dick and Harry. Yeah.
That's true. I'm sure there is a bit of method to that. Certainly. Talking about going back to product market fit, I want to come back to that. At Turing, what was PMF like? What did you all do different compared to your first startup? And leading to that, when did it feel, man, this business has legs?
In our case, I still remember some of the very initial customers that we signed up at Turing. It was amazing how in the A+ market here, where the customer pain point was very severe, customers had money to make the pain point go away. It's amazing how forgiving the customers were with the very even initial versions of our product and service offering. Customers were very, very forgiving. They were like, oh, you actually have tech. My alternative is between dealing with you guys, or dealing with a recruiting consultant that doesn't know the difference between Java and JavaScript, right? Okay, we would show some demos about how we test developers. The demo would crash. They were like, oh, don't worry about that. Your tech is actually real. It's not just sort of vaporware. Yeah, so that was definitely quite further sort of eye-opening for us, that even our MVP, the customers were kind of eating it up. And, then of course, we became more and more formidable. Our product, our tech, our offerings became a lot better. We built for scale. We built for quality. A lot of things like that when it comes to our platform. But yes, the very fact that people were eating up even an MVP was quite critical.
Right. So clearly A+ market, your timing was obviously fantastic. And like you beautifully said, what's the alternative to what you're offering? Right. Human recruiters, nothing against them, but clearly they didn't have the tech prowess that you guys came with. A psychological question. When you all, Jonathan, and you started the second time round, was there extra pressure that, man, we got to do this second time better, bigger, because else people might think the first time is fluke? Second time round, a lot of people feel, man, this better go well, else people might think my first one was a fluke.
Nobody knows this thing. Nobody really knows at the early days how something is going to play. Even some of the very best laid out plans will only happen a fraction of the time.
You guys went with the flow and let's see how it goes.
Yeah. And reality is, right, like when you pick a specific path, you also end up understanding it a lot better than other things, right? Like having picked entrepreneurship, yes, we became really good at many things here, and those skills could honestly only be best leveraged in founding another company.
Fair enough. Obviously, I'm sure you've been asked this question. ChatGPT blows up, etc. And end 2021, early 2022. Would you say that was a pivotal moment in your company? Because suddenly everyone's talking AI, right from Googles and Amazons and Metas and the smaller companies. I can't get away a day without thinking or talking about AI. Did that fundamentally change the trajectory of your company's growth?
Oh, certainly, certainly. I mean, we were, even working with some of these AI labs even prior, but yes, certainly this became a lot more mainstream after that, and had some very significant implications for our the second part of our growth once we crossed the 100 million ARR mark. Definitely, in terms of both work we do today with these frontier AI labs, as well as the work we do with Fortune 100 companies, which are increasingly about various AI implementations.
You guys unearth gems from around the world. What are some basic parameters that you look out for in developers so that they can be recruited and sort of be hired by these big companies? What matters the most?
It's a mix of things, right? Like being a good software developer or a data scientist or ML engineer, you be really good at in one dimension, and that will suffice. I would say being quite good, maybe in the top 10-20% of the world in 4 or 5 dimensions simultaneously can be very valuable. In some key dimensions, if you're very weak, that can be fatal. So I would say there's certainly programming skill slash which and I mean, good programming skill inherently also probably means you're getting a certain amount of raw intelligence for free. I mean, raw intelligence does matter to at least to an extent. Then of course we also test for proficiency in various programming languages, proficiency in various tech stacks. Now, if you were a full stack engineer applying for a job at Turing, you'd be tested in programming skill in this front end and back end related tech stacks, and also various soft skills. So
Right.
we do try and assess where you are on the spectrum between being an individual contributor versus a tech lead versus a tech lead manager, and implicitly we think of this in terms of can you own things at task scope, where you can execute if somebody creates precise tasks for you? Can you execute at somewhat project scope, where people tell you what needs to be built and you can break it down, you can plan, you can make the trade-offs or and everything? Or can you even operate at company scope, where you can literally be partners to the business, you can propose various things that can be built, really understand what the end business goals are, what is the simplest thing you could be doing that would be most valuable, etc. So this becomes quite key as well. And all the more so, I would say, in this remote first world, a lot of these, in addition to of course, the raw tech skills, these other things do become quite critical, just because one has to be a lot more proactive. One has to be the kind that is engaging with various cross-functional team members in the company that you're working with, understand what the broader goals are, understand what are the objectives of different individuals, etc. If all you do is default toward order taking, very soon you'll not be considered very valuable.
You spoke about top 20. Like, I'm trying to figure out, where are you finding, is there a geographical advantage, disadvantage when it comes to AI led engineers or hires? Are there 2-3 countries where you're sort of seeing that there are dense populations of very good talent around the world outside the US, let's say?
Yeah, so I would say there's a lot of countries. Our biggest learning at Turing has really been, every 2 or 3 years, some country really surprises us in terms of the kinds of talent that burst forth. So our biggest learning at Turing has been literally be everywhere. If you have a cost-effective way to be everywhere, literally be everywhere. So today, we have a large number of software developers in many countries in Latin America, like Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, and so on. There's a lot of them in multiple countries in Africa, like Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Djibouti, all sorts of places. We have a number of them in countries in Eastern Europe. Like in the past, a lot of them used to be in Russia and Ukraine itself. Now, of course, because of the war, many of them have sort of migrated to other countries, but there's still all the other countries like Poland, Romania, Serbia, and Bulgaria, and so on. There's of course India, there's Vietnam, but there's a lot of other Asian countries too. There's Kazakhstan, there's a number of countries.
Fantastic how you've sort of worked around the A+ market, and you all are obviously very mindful of the geopolitical movements and or the economic movements as well. Before the podcast started, we were talking about remote. I'm personally a big believer of remote and managing remote. What's your take on it? How is Turing managing that? Because obviously in the US, from here we read, Amazon's RTO and many companies sort of calling back. In the tech world, what's your view? And how are you guys managing remote versus RTO?
Remote was all often talked of as this one, a way to whatever avoid commute, create more flexibility, and all that stuff. We never thought that was yes. Those were all like cherry on the cake. Those were never the cake. In our opinion, the biggest benefit of remote was by far that instead of having a 5 kilometer or a 10 kilometer hiring radius, your hiring radius is the entire this thing, the diameter of the planet, really. And that in turn means that you can tap into a much larger talent pool. You can put together an A+ team. You can do that at quite reasonable costs. And if one were to do all of that, then in many ways the benefits that come from that is so much that a lot of the remaining problems around remote collaboration were quite solvable. So this was our thing. This was always the point of view we've held. So I do think a lot of people who've insisted on return to office, etc., have very much hired with the old philosophy. I don't think many of the big tech companies even were particularly good at adapting even very basic best practices to remote, even though they had excellent engineering cultures and excellent hiring standards and so on. Certainly, some companies have embraced remote properly, the best practices around remote properly, and are thriving quite well. Many of the others, however, are very much, I think, going back a little bit to their old ways, in part also because, well, their team is really quite local in nature. They have really not tapped into the global talent pool at all, which is really, I would say, by far the largest benefit of remote.
Yeah. Vijay, one last question on AI before we'll just have 2-3 fun personal questions. When you compare AI versus human talent, what is one thing that AI is still struggling to do that you think humans are far better at sort of solving for in the current AI domain?
There's a lot of bits and pieces of things that AI does very well today, and we are actively helping advance many of these capabilities ourselves. But yes, the reality is we are very much in this paradoxical situation where it's difficult for AI to even automate, 15 minutes of the median worker's job. Because the difficulty is that the median worker's job involves a mix of different capabilities, and today AI capabilities have kind of grown a little inconsistently across these. So today, the models are, generally speaking, relatively better at handling text inputs compared to many others. There's a lot of tremendous weaknesses when it comes to multimodality, like being able to reason from business graphs, from looking at a screen, like some kind of a system design diagram or a video and various things like this, all of which become quite critical to a knowledge worker's work. There's also other weaknesses when it comes to tool use, function calling, and things like this, which are quite a problem as well. And another big one is also computer use, basically, right? Like we have seen some early nice demos in these operator like and these browser agent like models, but they have to make quite a few advances. Like today, it even fails at things like reliably copy pasting something, and so I think a bunch of these things compounding makes it difficult to do elegant end-to-end workflow automations unless one were to carefully pick the kind of sub-problems which play to the AI's strengths.
Fair enough. All right, we're at the hour, and so 3 quick rapid-fire questions, few words, 1 to 2 words. Your favorite book?
Knowledge and Decisions by Thomas Sowell.
Your favorite investor?
Let's say Peter Thiel.
A founder that you really admire apart from Jonathan and yourself?
Steve Jobs.
All right, the last one. Quick question on, from your lens as a serial entrepreneur, the value of communities such as TIE.
Oh, extremely valuable, right? This is how sort of people learn, get insights, get connected, and so on, right? Your idea has legs. Talking to some actual, let's say, friendly VCs in your network before maybe talking to the real VCs, if you will. All of that community is quite central.
Fantastic, Vijay. It's been such an honor and privilege to have you and host you in Singapore, both at the event at 1880 and TIE Talks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to wrap this session. The 3 things that I sort of take away, I think one of my biggest takeaways from his experience is the whole A plus market concept, if for founders in Singapore, Southeast Asia, you could be anywhere, like he said, even in Stanford, you've got to sort of expand your world horizon and think. I think the second thing that I sort of took away is the beautiful line that he spoke about, that the diameter of the planet is potentially your market. Some people may even think the universe, but you've got to think big. That's the second thing. And third thing, I love the fact that, Jonathan and him and as co-founders, they've just sort of seem like, sort of just riding the wave. They've backed each other, they've spent time, and they've leveraged their knowledge, their network, the startup ecosystem in the US, which I think we learned a lot about in terms of just these EIR programs existing, and spending a lot of time to sort of, deconstructing the problem, the way he sort of beautifully spoke about the various layers or constraints when it came to the domain that Turing operates in. Hope you've enjoyed this. Please do drop your comments and thoughts and ideas that you might have. We'll be sharing this on our usual platforms. Thank you for watching. Vijay, once again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a ton, Prantik.
Thank you.